Melissa Capurro, finally, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be here, Derek. I know it's been a long time coming for this.
Yeah, so just to storytell and lay it out for everybody. So the first time we tried to do this, we had internet connection problems.
My problems, I will say that. It was on my end, for sure.
And then you volleyed the ball to me, and I had a scheduling conflict. And then this time, which I haven't even elaborated on, I had a wedding this past weekend and came home with strep. So luckily, my antibiotics kicked in real fast. And in less than 24 hours, I feel like a new human. But I was seriously concerned yesterday. I was like, oh my God, if I have to cancel this thing again, this is just, the universe does not want this to happen.
Yeah, that's crazy. But I was like, after the internet issues, I was like, I've never had that issue before. I've never had problems like that. So I was like, I'm not even going to be in my house next time. I'm like, I'm getting out. I'm going to the office. I'm going to be somewhere else.
Hey, we're here. So we just got to get through the next like 45 minutes to an hour, and it's smooth sailing. Yeah,
I love it.
All right. Well, so before we dive in, today is kind of a fun, special day because it is the first day of the CrossFit Open in 2024. So do you have any predictions for the first workout?
I'm not sure. I thought I heard on Savon's podcast that something leaked about handstand walks being in the first workout. I don't know how true that is. I don't really know. I really haven't listened to anything about it coming on. But I'm also kind of wondered, like with quarterfinals being the top 25% now, does that mean the Open is going to be harder? So I don't know, but I'd say maybe handstand walks. I don't know. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts. One, if you told me that there was a leak 5 years ago, I would have told you you're crazy. But given the unfortunate pattern that has come about the last few years of things being leaked, kind of at all stages throughout the CrossFit Games, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if something got out. And with that said, I can appreciate how difficult it probably is for the CrossFit Games staff to prevent things from getting out, because just think about logistically how much has to go into testing these workouts, purchasing and then assembling and setting up the equipment. They have people that are on the videography team that don't even know a single thing about CrossFit, but are just there kind of witnessing and may not know the severity of getting caught editing by their wife. And they're like, oh, what's that? There's box jumps, So there's probably a million and one ways this could escape that we just don't appreciate as just basic humans watching this and getting excited for the Open.
For sure. I didn't even think about anything like that. I always thought it was like, all right, so centralized into like one area. It's like, if it leaked, it had to come from one spot, but that's definitely not the case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as will it be more difficult? It's difficult. It's hard to say, right? You would assume that if you're going to have a larger representation inside of quarterfinals, that they're going to have to make the Open harder, because what they're not going to want is a larger subset of people moving into quarters and not being able to do the majority of the moves. Does that make sense?
I think that's honestly going to happen anyway, though. I honestly think there are going to be people that make quarterfinals that can't do the movements, they can't lift the weights. I think just by nature of the way the Open is, because I think quarterfinal and Open CrossFit are two very different types of CrossFit.
I would agree with you. I just think that because of the amount of people they're going to let in, they can't. Okay, so what was the percentage change from last year in terms of who they're letting in?
Last year was top 10 and this year's top 25.
Right. So if you say then 15% more people are making it, it can't be that those 15% can't do anything.
Right.
Which would mean that they have to raise the bar in the Open to allow for at least some of that percentage base to be able to accomplish something in quarterfinals. Now, I'm not saying there won't be like one workout with one movement or maybe even two that is above the level of somebody that has made it to quarters, but it can't be like the year when they put strict ring muscle ups at regionals for the first time. And there were like, like entire groups of people that were like, I'm going to stand there and stare at the rings.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of what I was thinking, was that it might have to be a little bit more challenging if they're going to let more people in. But I don't know. I guess if I heard that handstand walks are going to be in it, that would check that box potentially. So I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I think you might see some movement combos that we haven't seen before. So while the movements themselves are the same, I could see the combinations being unique. So a good example of this would be like a handstand walk into handstand push-ups. Right?
You mean like
so like where you would walk through the wall.
Oh.
So like 25 feet walk to the wall, 15 handstand push-ups, some sort of lunge, right? Whatever the case is. So I could see something like that, or like burpee wall walks, where they're like,
oh yeah,
combining movements. Because Dave kept talking about how there was going to be some originality and uniqueness to the Open, and I'm like, there's only so many new movements you can introduce without starting to get corny.
Sure. I think the more that you start talking about like combining movements together, the more that we start getting into the realm of the grid league. I don't know if we've ever talked about that before, but with the grid league, it's crazy because they do like pistol thrusters, burpee pistols, and burpee to what's another one that they do? It's this really long one where essentially they do a burpee into a pistol into a box jump over, and it's a crazy name for it. I can't think of what it is, but that's what I think of when I think of combining movements together.
Yeah, I had on a coach from the Grid League, Nick Habich. He was on, and we talked about some of those things quite in detail. But yeah, I agree. It's you don't want to make it into like a show pony. You know what I mean? Like you can't make people learn this like one party trick that they're never ever going to have to use again. But there is a middle ground, and I think we might see there's some movement combinations, or just maybe even like triplets and combinations of like different movements together that we have never seen before. So who knows?
What do you think about like a rig complex, like a toe to bar into a chest to bar into like a something like that? Not grid style, but like you do like 3 toe to bar, then you do 2 chest to bar, and then you do 1 bar muscle up, and that's like 1 rep, something like that. How crazy would that be?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the problem would be that so few people practice that. And listen, if it's the games, I can appreciate them making people do things for the first time, because at that level, you should be able to figure it out. And actually, that's part of testing. But in the Open, do you want your average members trying a bunch of things for the very first time, putting themselves in positions they haven't before? I just don't think that that's a recipe for success.
Definitely not.
It would be amusing, like to watch the athletes do it, but for the general population, it would be very cringe.
For sure. And do you feel like, if they're taking more people for the Open, and say that there are people that maybe don't have a ton of the skills or the strength necessary to lift the weights, are you of the thought process that like, even if you make quarterfinals, doesn't mean you should do quarterfinals?
Oh, 1,000%. I don't think that every person at every CrossFit gym across the country should do the Open. I am not that person. But here's the thing. I'm also not the person that's like, I hate CrossFit and it sucks. Like I think that we can have an honest conversation of the pros and cons, and more importantly, how it's applicable to different people at different stages throughout their lives. I just don't think that people need to be in a competition mindset throughout every season of their life. I don't think that there are limitations and things that people might be experiencing that it would not be in their best interest to put them in a position to where they're going to try to overachieve something. There's a lot of reasons why people should or shouldn't do the CrossFit Open. And the same would be true for quarters. Especially when the load, how should I say this? When the intended stimulus and the load exceed what a person is capable of, and they wouldn't be able to reach said stimulus, or they would be in a totally different energy system. It's like, what is the risk to reward of doing? So an example of this would be like someone's max deadlift is 300, and the workout starts with like 30 deadlifts at their max. It's like, and there's a 10-minute time cap, and you got this person just like yanking on a bar. And now obviously that's an extreme example, but like, it very well could show up in the form of like an Olympic lift. Gymnastics are a little bit more benign, but still, it's like, do you want someone swinging on rings that hasn't ever done a muscle up for 12 minutes in a row that can barely do a ring dip? I'm like, I don't know that this makes sense. So it really just depends on the movements, and there's the criteria and like the person and how like confident you are in them, and how much confidence they have in themselves. So like, yes, there's a kind of a million chips that need to get on the table before you make a decision like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree for sure with the part like of if the intended stimulus is more than what the person's capable of, like, yeah, I mean, that's an obvious answer, I think, for sure.
Well, and then there's the, like, is it even in alignment with their goals? Like that's another part of the competition scene. It's like, if you have somebody that's like, oh, my goal is like, we have a 70-year-old woman that came to us and she's like, I just want to be able to walk better when I go on my trip to France and Italy. And I'm like, you don't need to do the Open. Like, that just doesn't make sense for you, And then we have a whole another body of athletes or members that like, they love this every single year. It's like they're signing up, they're watching all the Open workouts, like they're there screaming and hooting and hollering during Friday Night Lights. So like, I'm cool with having both sides.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think people also have, just from what society and social media and just the power technology makes the Open every single year. I feel like there's a lot of people that feel like they should do it. Like they have like an obligation. They feel an obligation to have to do it, whether it's a societal thing or, an external just pressure type situation. I feel like there's a lot of people that feel like they need to do it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's peer pressure for sure. I mean, I guess I think you could filter all of it through the question of like, will this make me better or worse?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm very much of the school of thought that there's usually two answers to that question, and it's a yes or a no. And there's really no in between. So it's like, if you have a goal and your goal is to walk better on a vacation trip, it's either a yes or a no answer. Like there's no in between of like, yeah, I could do this and it would be fun, but nope, it's yes or it's no. And I think the same thing goes for anybody that's trying to figure out whether they should do the Open or not. Does it align with what your goals are? Yes, no. Okay, there's your answer.
That's awesome. I love that explanation. Well, this was a fun little intro into the podcast, and by far the longest I've gotten before like diving into the guests. But thank you so much for jumping on. And obviously we talked about trying to get this whole thing off the ground running, but you started out in Delaware. So kind of walk me through what got you into PT school and why you chose to be a physical therapist in the first place.
Yeah. So pretty much from the age of 7, 8, 9, I pretty much knew exactly what I wanted to do. I grew up playing sports. I loved sports my entire life. And I originally really wanted to be an athlete. And when I started to get to the age where I realized that may not be financially feasible, I started to think, okay, like what else can I do? Like if I'm not going to be an athlete, like what else can I do with the rest of my life? So I have an uncle who lives out in Santa Monica, California, and he owns a couple of physical therapy practices. And one day my dad showed me the back of a New York Post newspaper. I don't know if you've ever seen a New York Post newspaper before, but it's very characteristic in the way that the font is written and just the way it appears. Like I see a New York Post newspaper, it just catches my eye and I'm like, oh, I know what that is. That's a New York Post. So I'm looking at the back of the newspaper, which was always the sports section. And my uncle is on the back cover of the sports section, stretching out Jackie Joyner-Kersee, who was a Olympic track and field athlete in the South Korea Olympics, I think in the 70s. And he was her personal physical therapist. And from the moment that I saw that picture, I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, that's the thing. So ever since that moment, I was probably, like I said, 8, 9, maybe. Ever since that moment, that's what I wanted to do. And I really never deviated from that plan. So went through high school knowing that I wanted to apply to a college that had a PT program or a kinesiology program that could then get me into PT school. So I went to the University of Maryland for undergrad, where I studied kinesiology, and I got my bachelor's degree there in kinesiology. And from there, applied to Delaware, which was the number one PT school at the time. I think it might still be. It usually was like tied with a couple other schools. Ended up going there, spent 2.5 years there where I got my doctorate of physical therapy and I got a master's in clinical health science. And that's where I originally found CrossFit. And that's where I blended CrossFit and physical therapy together. And that's how I ended up where I'm at now.
How fortunate do you feel that you figured out that what you wanted to do at such a young age?
Oh my gosh. Like, you have no idea. From the amount of people that I've talked to in the past that are not really sure what they want to do growing up and really don't find that out for years and years and years. And to not have gone through that whole process, so grateful. So just having known that like that was the thing, but then also not deviating from the thing, not questioning if that was the thing or not. It was like, yep, all right, cool, we're going to do that. And that's really it. And I never changed. So very, very grateful for sure.
It was just like putting money into the market. There's a compounding effect that takes place when you start thinking and creating visions and kind of orchestrating your life in a specific direction from the time that you're very young. You know, you can just, because you acquire so much knowledge that doesn't distract you from the main thing. They're like, I feel like when people are like, I want to do this, no, I want to do that. It's like, you may not even start your real career until you're in your mid to late 20s and you're like starting from the bottom. You know, that's like one of the hardest things with people that start multiple businesses is like, you go back to zero. You know what I mean? Like, and obviously you can work laterally and, you know, cut out some of it. But point being is starting so young just gives you such a runway.
Yeah, for sure. And I used to really hate things like testing, practical exams, like all the things that you have to do to get into PT school and be successful in PT school. So knowing those things were going to be on my path, like that still didn't even matter. Like I was like, all right, cool. I guess I'm going to have to do some of that stuff to really get to where I want to go. So it's just cool that ended up being my true path because I followed through with that. And there was just nothing that could steer me away from that.
Now, you came in a few years after me, but my experience through a kinesis and exercise science department as CrossFit was still gaining a lot of popularity was in general a pushback. Like that was like the general consensus. What was your feelings on how the PT department at Delaware looked at CrossFit as a methodology and as a sport?
Honestly, they loved it. I had a few of my professors that were involved in the CrossFit program on campus. And that was really cool about the University of Delaware is they have a CrossFit affiliate on campus. So I started my CrossFit career there and I had some of my professors in class with me. And I think just from the caliber of professors that we had at the university, they were very, widely recognized, did a lot of really great research. So I think having them and knowing and trusting them and knowing that they thought it was a good methodology really helps me to figure that out and trust them as well. But I also think that I joined the party at a time where it was starting to gain more recognition and moving towards the realm of like, hey, this is actually really good for what we do. I ended up at some point taking my L1, and I feel like the L1 curriculum should be in the PT school curriculum, like teaching people how to squat, deadlift. Us PTs don't learn how to do that in PT school. So I feel like that should be part of everyone's curriculum.
Isn't it crazy how so compartmentalized fitness and health are? Like if you go to your primary doctor and you're like, hey, I'm overweight and I'm pre-diabetic and, I've got this whole slew of other health conditions going on. And he goes, yeah, you should exercise more. And you go, all right, what should I do? He's like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like they'll be like, go for a walk. And you should just go like sign up at a gym. So it's just so funny, like how people can be so specialized and intelligent in one particular area and not so in another. And I think you just pointed out another blind spot there, right? It's like as physical therapists, like there's probably not many people more on the planet that know the human body more. Yet when it comes to the application of exercise, you're kind of the anomaly if you're the physical therapist that can also program exercise.
Correct. So I do a lot of my continuing education through this company called the Institute of Clinical Excellence. And their whole thing is about creating physical therapist version 2.0. And in our courses, we learn about programming for strength, programming for obviously rehab stuff, but making it more towards the idea of getting someone back into fitness. So the idea of rehab EMOMs comes up, where it's like programming maybe something like a movement that was previously painful to someone, but is now like working to get back into stuff, putting it in low volumes, like really stuff that like is just common knowledge to coaches probably, or stuff that they're more familiar with that maybe PTs aren't. But yeah, like one of our last classes, I'm in a class with them right now, and we're talking about how to evaluate the Olympic lifts, because that's going to put physical therapists that are in that class so far ahead of everybody else in terms of PTs that can't look at an Olympic lift and point out a fault and be like, okay, this is where you went wrong. So it really is creating PT version 2.0, because it's the fitness version of the PT, which in my opinion is going to be a huge asset in the future, just because I think the healthcare clinic the future is the gym. I think a lot of this is really going to transition to the gym, and insurance is eventually going to die out.
I sure as hell hope so. Oh my gosh. Well, first I want to point out, it's so refreshing to hear, and I'm so glad to hear that your experience through Delaware was by and large in support of the CrossFit methodology. Because when I was going through school, and I finished in 2011, it was not that way. And I think somewhere between then and when you were in school, the NSCA got sued big time, and there was a bunch of like falsified data that came out, and that probably cleared the air a little bit. And as you said, I think there were some people that were really important and integral to that program that had personal experience inside of the CrossFit methodology, and that helps a ton.
Yeah, 100%. But I also think that at this point, people were also able to see and draw parallels that like, hey, maybe we need PTs in this space. But in order to get PTs in this space, PTs need to actually do the thing so that the athletes actually trust them.
Yeah, I mean, you learn by doing, and there is, there's an element of, if I'm an athlete and I know that, while you may not be able to clean or snatch as much as me, but I know you can do the movements fairly proficiently, I acknowledge that like your advice is going to come from a place of understanding, rather than I'm the teacher that's telling you to do something I've never done myself.
Correct. That's exactly what I meant. Yeah. And it's like it's about you being relatable to your patients and all that, because if you don't do the things that they do, they're not going to be able to put their trust in you that you know what they're doing, what they want to get back to.
Absolutely. Now, you've had some pretty extensive work that you've done with athletes, one in the Grid League, and two inside of a CrossFit gym. So talk to me a little bit about some of the unique challenges that you face in working with those types of people, we'll say.
Oh, goodness. Where do I start? Let's see. I think it's easy to get involved with people that have egos. So working with athletes, they come in with these preconceived notions of like, I should be able to do this. I want to do this, and I need to be able to do this. So no matter what you tell me, I'm still going to be doing these things. So that's one thing. And it's a tough conversation to be able to have with an athlete that like, I know what's best for you. I know you want to do these things, but now is probably not the time that you should be doing these things, because we need to focus on XYZ before you go back to ABC. So being able to navigate a conversation of knowing what's best for the athlete, and then the athlete trusting you and knowing that you are the one that knows and has their best interest at heart. And I also think that I went into PT working with athletes with the preconceived notion that like they're so different than anybody else, which is not true at all. So for example, I started my career at a generic outpatient PT clinic where I saw like your general, gen pop person, mostly people that were out of shape, overweight, And I was like, oh, okay, it's really easy to treat those people, but how do you treat someone who's like really in shape and really strong and all this? And it's really the same. Like I personally thought that being able to treat that type of individual is going to be so much harder, because it's like, well, where am I going to find something wrong with them? They're already like specimens, like these awesome, strong human beings that like can do all these things. And it's really also just taken me some time to get my mindset right, in the sense that like they're coming to you for a reason, something's up, and it's really not any different than any other person. So that's just a struggle that I kind of had to get through myself, not necessarily with other athletes, but the first one was definitely a big one, like dealing with the egos and stuff like that. But I also think that them trusting you, like I was talking about before, is really, really important, and building that rapport and that trust with them beforehand.
Yeah, that makes me think of experiencing new people coming through the door, and then comparing that experience to working with someone that has kind of an athletic base, and how when someone comes through our door and they move like a wet noodle, meaning like they just have like very little body control, sometimes it's easier to kind of impart, we'll say, physiological wisdom, if you will, right? And help them kind of like build a base, because it's all new to them, right? And also they look at you as the expert, and they're all trusting. Many athletes have had a ton of different coaches, have received a bunch of different advice, many of the times, which is contrary. And they have formulated or formed these mechanical, we'll call them idiosyncrasies, over many years of training. So trying to get them out of them, or convince them that other methods would prolong their athletic career, or maybe even produce more power or strength in whatever, realm they're trying to optimize, is a tough conversation to have. And even in the case that they're willing to come on board and work on those things, it's hard to rewire habits that have been ingrained for 10 plus years.
Right. And the person has to be willing to go that route first, which is another conversation too. So it's like, okay, are you willing? Yes. Okay. Now what do we do in order to change those habits and those thought patterns and movement patterns and all that?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, my mind is just like going through all the different athletes that I've worked with and having to make different iterations of things. I had a girl that was competing at the national level for Olympic weightlifting, and we switched her split jerk stance. And like that process of relearning that was painstaking for everyone. Like I felt bad for her, but we both knew it was necessary, but I also knew it was going to come with a ton of frustration, and it did. But yeah, it's always a wild ride.
It is. And one of my original athletes, I see her every single day. She was my first private athlete that I took on through my business. I see her every day because she's in the gym that I practice out of. And her and I are very close, and I'm very in tune with her training, and her coach is my coach. So there's a lot of open doors and open communication. So she's been, for example, experiencing some wrist pain in the front rack position recently. And she's very good about doing her rehab. She does everything I tell her to do, almost to a fault, where it's like, you've been doing rehab for 2 hours now. Are you done? Like there's a such thing as too much, right? So she has pain in the front rack in her wrist. And the other day I see her doing front rack step-ups. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm working on stuff for my knee. And I'm like, but don't you realize you're putting extra strain like on your wrists of things that you don't necessarily like need to be doing? Like you don't need to do front rack step ups. You can grab 2 kettlebells, have them in the suitcase position, like whatever. She's like, oh, you're right. Like sometimes just like pointing out the obvious too is the thing that needs to happen, because with her being her and just wanting to do everything she can to just be the best at what she's doing, which I love. And I love that so much, but it's just like, okay, you gotta take it back a little bit.
Yeah. Sometimes it is just an acknowledgement and awareness, but speaking to the ego piece, I think it would help kind of your mid-level athlete to get kind of a view into the programming and the training of somebody that's at the top tier level, like, in this sport, like let's say the top 20% of the CrossFit games, and seeing how frequent they have to make adjustments to their training because of limitations and things that they're dealing with, and just appreciate the fact that like you may have a 12-week or 16-week program written out, right? All your mesocycles are ready to go. You're feeling confident. You're like, perfect. If I do everything the right way and I eat right, I sleep right, I should be able to hit these numbers on these movements. And it's like, you need to accept that like you could be in week 14 and have something happen and you don't even get to max out. Doesn't mean you didn't get any better, and sometimes it just means like, okay, we got to take like 4 to 6 weeks and step back, but we're going to let that heal, because again, there's always like the pinnacle, which is the ultimate goal, which is for some people, that's the open, for some people that's quarters, for some people that's semis, for some people that's the games. But that way it kind of helps you make decisions around your training that are focused on one thing and one thing only, which is like the ultimate goal.
Right. Hard. It's definitely hard navigating those conversations, but very, very much worth it.
Let's go into some specifics. Like what would you say are some of the most common injuries that you see that you feel people could avoid with some basic actionable advice?
Shoulders. I see a lot of shoulder pain. I see a lot of low back pain. That's probably the top 2 injuries that I see the most of. And that actionable advice, honestly, is get your stress, your diet, and your sleep under control. Because usually the injuries that result from whatever these injuries are, usually they're resulting from some sort of inefficiency in recovery. So it's usually coming from a situation where the load on the body, on the system, is beyond the capacity of what the individual is capable of sustaining. Which, if you are cognizant of your stress management, your diet, and how much you're sleeping, those are 3 things that most people are not thinking about that are the easiest and most, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? The things that we have at our fingertips the most to really take hold on and prevent injuries. So yeah, I would say a lot of shoulder pain, especially with everything that we do overhead, a lot of low back pain. And yeah, just really getting a hold of your stress, your diet, and your sleep, because that's going to be huge right there. And if you do rehab and you don't have those 3 things in control, you're probably not going to make a whole lot of progress.
Yeah. They seem obvious, but when you dive deep into people's lives, you realize very quickly that they're also some of the first things that give way, especially for people that pride themselves on being an athlete, because they'll always make sure they give 100% in the gym. But I only got 6 hours because I was playing with my phone. Like I'm super stressed because I took on way too much outside of work, and it's like they let those things slide. But with training, they're like, I get all my reps in, I follow to a T, you know what I mean? Like, I don't care how long it takes, I'm doing it. So yeah, I agree. It's those are 3 buckets that are, while they're super important, are kind of difficult to get people to pour into consistently.
Yeah. And I think also getting people to reflect on those things is also really hard too. Like getting them not necessarily to tell the truth, but to reflect on like, how are you actually doing with these things? Because I feel like a lot of people are generally like, yeah, I do pretty good. But then when they think about it, it's like, oh, wow. Yeah, I guess I really only did sleep 4 hours last night. And that's been kind of like a theme. And then, like I've been getting home late, so I really haven't been eating the way I should be. Like really getting people to think about that and reflect on it is actually pretty eye-opening, not only to the provider, me, but the patient themselves.
Yeah. And some of these things can kind of fly under the radar. The one that always gets me is when someone comes to me and they want to lose weight, more times than not, one of the first things they tell me is, I eat pretty good. And I'm like, we both know that's not possible given the current circumstance, right? And that's not a dig at them. That's just an acknowledgement of, we need to zoom in because something's off. Right. But acknowledgement is the first step. It's like, we have to figure out, like if you can't measure it, you can't understand it. So first we have to get a good sense of what are you putting into your body on a regular basis? And what often happens is people don't keep track of anything they eat. And when they eat the way they want to, they tell themselves a story of like, I'm eating well. But then when they binge eat at night, or they're like out at dinner 3 nights a week, the alarm bells aren't going off. They're just like, oh yeah, well, it's just an outing with my friends. Like, and they're not keeping track of the fact that over the course of a month, they've like gone out to eat 15 times, and it's just that those things are easy to kind of slide under the rug. But once you start forcing people to like take measure of everything, then it's like, hey, like, look at the percentage of times that like you didn't eat breakfast over the last month. Right. And then you don't have energy when you work out. It's like, I wonder what would happen if we gave you an extra 300 to 400 calories for that meal, and it's those small changes make drastic differences when they start getting applied on a daily or weekly basis.
Absolutely. And usually there's, I guess the first thing that I'm thinking of is like, you have to move mountains sometimes to get them to do those things. Even though it's a small, you would think it's like a small ask, but it's like you're really having to change someone's lifestyle to do that,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Now, one of the misconceptions that I see quite often that I wanted to ask you about is people will come to us and my coaches all the time when they're dealing with shoulder or lower back pain. And they'll say, how can I stretch my shoulders, or how can I stretch my lower back? And I want to put my hands over my face and go, stop doing that. Stop stretching. Talk to me about the relationship between pain, stretching, strength, stability, and everything in between.
Gosh, yeah. It's like, where do we even start with that? So as a PT, like one of the things that I always have to do when talking to someone, or if I have a patient, like the first step is always to assess someone, because if you don't look at how they move, what they're doing, that sort of thing, you're really not going to know what the next course of action is. So a lot of people say that body parts feel tight, but tightness is just a sensation, right? Like that doesn't necessarily mean that like something is short. So something feeling tight is not the same as a muscle being short or a joint being not super mobile. That's just a sensation. So a lot of the times when people feel like they're tight, it means that something is actually weak. It doesn't actually necessarily mean that there's a length problem somewhere. So usually that's correlated to a weakness somewhere. But a lot of people also that have hypermobility or have that almost like, I want to say wet noodle, even though it's not the same thing, but are very hypermobile and can just move so much and their joints are super loosey-goosey. A lot of those people feel tight too. And their problem is that they just don't have any stability. So it's really getting to figure out how the athlete moves and what they're doing to really figure out what they need. But I will say that too many people stretch and think that stretching is the answer to their problems. Maybe I shouldn't have said too many people stretch, because I could actually think of a handful of people that need to stretch more and really work on, like, for example, thoracic mobility. But I will say that I feel like too many people jump to the conclusion that because they have pain, that the answer is they need to stretch more, which the answer is probably more so you need to get stronger.
Yeah, well, and I think for people that don't know much about the body and all they have to go by is their internal sensations, you can see how people connect the dots and you can appreciate why they come to these misconceptions. So like a really good example of this is when you watch somebody deadlift and they round their back, right? And then they get done, they're like, oh, my back is bothering me. And they go, oh, my back must be weak. And it's like, actually, your back was the strongest part of that movement, which is why you used your back. Your hamstrings are weak, right? And it's like that. It's hard to see it that way unless they understand the mechanics of that movement and what it is that they're actually looking at. And I'm sure the same is true for, as you talked about, pain around joints or tightness around certain muscles or joints. It's hard because all people have to tell you is what they feel. It's kind of like if you don't know anything about your car and you go into the shop and they're like, what's wrong with it? You're like, I don't know. I started and it goes like clank, clank, clank. Like it's like to the person that's diagnosing the car, they're like, that is not super helpful, but all right, I'll look into it. And I feel like it's kind of the same when we're helping diagnose issues and help people, fix their shoulder or back pain.
Yeah, 100%. And I, like I said, I will just say that I think the general consensus of most people is like they definitely need to get stronger more so than just stretch more, and have that be the answer to that, and just rely on getting better mobility, because that's usually, I would say, usually not the answer.
For sure. And I think there's also an acceptance. This comes back to the ego piece, that the things you're going to have to do to strengthen the areas that you need to strengthen probably aren't going to look sexy. Right. So it's like, it's not going to be a super heavy front squat or thruster. It's probably going to look like put your feet up on a physio ball and do these like slow, controlled, eccentric hamstring curls and extensions. You know what I mean? Like, so fixing these things is done, by the way, often of exercises that are surprisingly difficult, but don't make you look super cool in the gym. And I think that that's often why you see people kind of avoid some of these. I hate calling them PT exercises. It's all just exercise. But at the end of the day, there's certain things that people get prescribed from their PT. They come into the gym and they feel like a goofball off to the side doing. And I think normalizing that and trying to have a culture within your gym of like, this is just part of what everyone does is just so transformative. I know for me, like as my coaching body of like myself and all my coaches has gotten older, people have dealt with more things, which means they've experienced more injuries and limitations, which means that they've had to do more of those things as part of their programming. And it has helped tremendously to have my members seeing coaches and other athletes doing these corrective exercises, if you will, that might look like 90-90 breathing, where you're like laying down with your feet on a box, right? Not super sexy. You're not maxing out, but still something that person does on a daily basis.
100%. And it's really cool because the community that I'm in, where I have my practice, my affiliate, I can look out of my window in my office at the gym floor, and pretty much almost any hour of the day, I can see someone doing PT exercises that I have prescribed them. So there is usually someone on the floor doing something like that at all hours of the day, whether it's any of my patients, whether it's any of my athletes that have come to me from, other gyms, anything like that. So there are a myriad of different people that I see daily that are doing stuff that I prescribe them while classes are going on during open gym. So it's just really cool to be able to see that in so many different athletes and know that there are other athletes watching them that's like, hey, this person's doing their rehab. Maybe I should do something like that, or get checked out to be able to do something like that.
Now, you love competing yourself. How has PT helped you from an athlete perspective?
I'm going to be honest with you. I am the worst patient, the absolute worst patient. I get injured and I think the world is ending. I have a hard time rehabbing myself. I'll be honest with you there, because I think it's more of a imposter syndrome in the sense that, like, am I sure I'm doing the right thing that I should be doing for this condition? Like, I feel very confident rehabbing someone else and being objective with what they're presenting with. But when it's my own body, I almost need like an extra eye to like get eyes on me and tell me if I'm doing the right thing. So, I just actually came off of, or am coming off of, a back injury, and I'm getting back into getting my leg strength back. So I'm in a half squat cycle right now because I lost a lot of leg strength from the back injury. And it's been tough, but I'm coming back, and I'm happy to be where I'm at. But to really answer your question, I usually am pretty good at warming up. So I take like a solid 30 to 45 minutes, even when I'm healthy, warming up. So I'd say that's been the biggest thing that has benefited me as being a PT, is knowing that, like, all right, I'm 30 years old now. Like, I need to make sure I'm warming up before I'm going into the strength piece or anything like that. So I think that's the biggest thing.
Yeah. I mean, as it relates to warming up, I mean, this has been something that I've always kind of bounced back and forth on, because you will have some athletes that are seemingly really diligent about prepping for exercise, but they'll spend like 30 minutes on a foam roller, and then they're doing all this general stuff, and then it gets very hyper specific. At what point are you just time wasting?
I think it depends. I think it really depends on the athlete. I mean, for the people who just roll around and lay on foam rollers, like I really wonder and am very curious to know if they like really think that something is like happening or if some like sort of change within the tissue is happening. I went to a clinical or a continuing education course at one point. Can't remember the group that put it on, but I remember that the way that they taught us to warm up was you always start with like 2 to 3 minutes on a foam roller, like quick and dirty, like just get on one, get some blood flow going, all that sort of stuff. And honestly, like even to this day, I don't really know what a foam roller truly does other than people think that it feels good and that's why they do it. So if someone comes to me like, hey, should I be foam rolling? Like if their answer to my question saying like, hey, does it feel good? Like, do you like how you feel after you do it? And the answer is yes, then I'm going to tell them yes, but with the intention of like, they're doing it because it feels good, not because there's a tissue change in life happening. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Yeah. I mean, I remember when I first got into the CrossFit scene, foam rolling was really, really popular. Like you would go to a competition and there would be like 80 of them laying around on the ground. It has become less so, but I remember there was a research paper that came out. I want to say it was like 2014, where they looked at the amount of pressure that would need to be applied to the foam roller to actually cause myofascial release. And it was something absurd because they had tested this on, it was either mice or rats. And the mice and rats were put under in order to be able to like cause the change. And it was, I want to say it was something like 9 times your body weight would have to be applied in order to be able to like actually create physiological change. So the point of it was kind of to what you were saying, like, if you want to do this because you think it makes you feel better, fine, but don't think you're actually creating any physiological change by doing it.
Right. And I know so many people that can just like lay on a foam roller for 20, 30 minutes and like really feel like they've done some good. And mentally, maybe they have, but again, physiologically, that's not necessarily the case.
Well, if nothing else, you're contorting your body into positions that requires you to be kind of active. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's almost like the byproduct of foam rolling can kind of warm you up. I think there's also a psychological piece to it because it's kind of this like passive start to a training session. It's just so difficult because like I've seen both sides of the fence. Like I've been like when I was involved in Olympic weightlifting, like I had to have a long warm up routine or my body generally felt like junk. But I also would see people that would come in and be like the jungle cat, where they would basically pick up a bar, run through 10 minutes of playing with it, and then they're off to the races. So I think, like you said, it does really depend on the individual. I do think there can be a point of diminishing returns when you feel like you need to mobilize every single aspect of your body before you start moving. And usually, and you could speak to this more than me, sometimes if your warm-ups are too long, it can mean that there's actually an underlying problem that's causing some sort of like hip imbalance. Just for example, that like you should probably do some exercises to just correct rather than doing hip mobility for 25 minutes every time you have to squat.
And maybe mobility isn't even the problem at that point, kind of like what you're saying. So yeah, I agree for sure.
Now, in addition to working with CrossFit athletes, you've also worked with some grid athletes. And I'm sure that because of some of the challenges that they face as part of their competition, that you see some very interesting injuries that come about from that sport. Is there anything that's unique to grid that you don't see in CrossFit?
Honestly, no. And kind of like alluding to what I was saying before, like all of these athletes are the same and really presenting with the same stuff that like you would find in like any other clinic. Like I'm not really seeing anything crazy that I haven't seen before. I think that just with the complexity of the sport, that you may feel like you may see some different stuff, but honestly, the injuries are the same. But the way that I manage those athletes or what I'm there for in terms of like on the immediate side of things, like I'm doing a lot of manual work for grid athletes, whereas in my practice at the gym, manual work is not my number one go-to, just because I am of the philosophy that movement is medicine. Like I think you're going to get more out of moving than me passively like doing the stretch on you or giving you some soft tissue work. But game day stuff for the athletes, that I sponsor and work with on the grid team, that's going to be very much like manual therapy based and helping them get warmed up and ready to go for their matches.
Gotcha. Now, you mentioned that while it's difficult for you in terms of like the psychological impact that injuries might have on you and your training, what is your experience and what kind of tactics do you use when athletes sustain some sort of an injury or setback in helping them set themselves up for success, like seeing this as a chance to get better, seeing this as an opportunity to fix some things? And like, how do you get people in the right mindset when they've experienced an injury?
Yeah. And this is something that I actually had to figure out on my own too, because I went through my back injury and I felt like I was really starting to get strong. I was really starting to, hone in on the Olympic lifts and everything was going really well. And then all of a sudden I couldn't do all that anymore. So I said to myself, I was like, hey, I'm going to get really good at gymnastics because I suck at that right now. So that's kind of the approach that I take with my athletes. Having them realize that while there are some things they may not be able to do at their best, bet right now, doing what we can in those departments and still loading them in ways that are going to set them up for success once they are back at 100%, but then really doubling down on the things that they can do and they may not be great at the moment. So like I was just saying, previously my gymnastics really held me back. So when I had my back injury, I was like, great, I'm going to take some time and really dive headfirst into gymnastics for a little bit. And 3 days a week, I was like, great, I'm going to practice at the end of a training session for 15 minutes, in addition to my other training that I already have and really hone in on these skills. So I think just getting them to realize that they can still load their bodies in the movement patterns that they can't do at 100% right now, but B, they can also work on things that maybe they were neglecting prior. So giving them those two kind of nuggets really does help. This is a luxury that I feel is somewhat unique to CrossFit because I think of the psychological torment that exists when you have someone like, let's say an Olympic lifter or a power lifter, where it's like you have like 2 or 3 lifts that you can do, right? So it's like if you sustain a knee injury and you're an Olympic lifter, it's like it's torture because now what are you going to do? You're just going to bench and press and do upper body work for the next 6 weeks. Whereas in CrossFit, there's so many more variations and movements that you have to play with. So it just gives you a little bit more leeway in that sense. Yeah. So absolutely. And that's exactly what I did personally. Like during my back injury, like I said, I really niched down on gymnastics for a little bit and it was hard, but I mean, it did work. It did work. And there's so many things that we have to get good at as CrossFitters. So it does prove to be helpful in a way to be able to focus on something else for a little bit. So we covered the importance of getting your stress management taken care of, sleep, and diet. We talked about the importance of warm up. Is there anything else that you think the listeners could take from you that they could apply to their training that would make them fitter and stronger for longer? This is a little unconventional, but get out of the gym. A lot of the things that I've experienced with the athletes that I have, I feel like I see them in the gym all the time and they're like beating their heads against a wall with a movement or a skill or getting stronger, whatever the thing is. Like, take yourself out of the gym and find a hobby outside of the gym. And I say this because I struggled with this too for a really long time, is like, especially with me having my career and my passion as one in the same spot is a blessing and a curse, because it's like, well, when people ask me what I do for fun, it's like, oh shit, what else do I do for fun other than spend time in the gym and talk to people and work out and work with people, you know? So, I think my biggest advice is get out of the gym and find ways to be active outside the gym, because it's going to translate more to your fitness and your mental state than you can really imagine. Yeah, I know I've mentioned this on other episodes, but I never miss the opportunity to make this point. The other thing that I find is so beneficial for people that find active hobbies outside of the gym is it makes it that much more important for you as to why you go to the gym in the first place.
Because like, for instance, when you have someone that shows up at my gym and they're like, I want to lose 20 pounds. It's like, they may actually really want that goal, but once they achieve it, it's like, well, where's the motivator? Whereas when the things that you do in your lifestyle, going on hikes, maybe you surf, maybe you like to run with your dog, right? Whatever the case is, when those things are, and preserving them is a large part of the reason why you go to the gym and do these exercises, it just makes it that much more a part of your why, rather than these like vanity metrics of, I want to grow my biceps or lose fat around my stomach. You know what I mean? So it's like, it solves both of those problems. For you, it solves the problem of like, you're putting your body through different demands rather than just the same repetitive things you're doing in the gym. And then from my perspective, I'm like, and it's going to make it that much easier to have a true driver as to why you need to be in the gym in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just even with the definition of CrossFit, regularly playing and trying new sports, right? Go out and do something different and see how it transfers your ability to do stuff in the gym. And I think a big part of it is also mental too. Like, a lot of my athletes are head cases, and being able to really get out of the gym and enjoy something else out of that environment is actually really, really important for them mentally. So
I love it. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for coming on. Tell everyone where they can learn more about you.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. My Instagram, you guys can find out a little bit more about me and what I do and reach out and say, hey, if you enjoyed what you've heard on this podcast. My handle is The Stoic Physio, and my website is www.thestoicphysio.com. And I would say those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me.
I love it. Thanks so much for coming on again.
Thank you so much, Derek. I appreciate it.